proposition is research as demographics, research as preference. We know that there are some services that people will not go to. Meals on Wheels was a fundamental program for aged care where people could not cook. Ethnic communities didn't want a bar of it because the food was not theirs. We're talking a major cultural tenet, the role of food. So we knew that in those areas we could say, well, that's not going to work. Let's look at different models. So we're able to use the research in terms of who was using what service and why they weren't using it if they were not using it as a very important aspect of how to build the services. And then finally, and I think this is a growing area for us, we're starting to look at research as evaluation. So if we are putting out programs, are they fundamentally or actually meeting the needs of people? That's where we start getting some quite informed approaches. Now, there's significant change in this area because I'm actually saying you need a lot of research. And remember where I said we started up in the mid-80s and developed this really big infrastructure? It was feeding this. It was feeding us in terms of ageing. It was feeding us in terms of children's services. And this is what actually happened. So in that early period in the 80s and 90s, we developed the Australian Institute of Multicultural Affairs. It was doing some fundamental work around access to services by migrant groups. It started doing some of the really early stuff around ageing. Then that got changed into something a bit stronger, the Bureau of Immigration Research. It was allowing money to go to academic institutions, community organisations to actually do research in this area, to create another reality. It then broadened because we felt immigration was too narrow, that the discussions needed to be bigger. So we developed the Bureau of Immigration and Multicultural and Population Research. That was great. Then the Howard years came in. Great structure, but what we start to do is minimise it. So we then stopped that organisation, its funding was cut, and we started moving research which was about how people live in Australian society to now research and a research division in the Department of Immigration and Multicultural Affairs. We have devolved it. And by devolving it, we actually create a relevance which is only about immigration rather than settlement or life or participation. And I think that's a really fundamental issue. And even further still, by the time we actually are right now in terms of research, it is now sitting in the Department of Immigration and Citizenship. Even the multicultural capacity of that research is gone. So now most of the research which takes place is about, well, you know, where do Muslim young people get their media from, and is it potentially going to be an issue in terms of homegrown terrorism? The whole agenda has moved that way. And you've got to, and I've got to say to you, and you've got to understand that without that research, we actually are fundamentally unable to say how well we're going in this environment. So we need a new research agenda. We need to reposition ethnicity, language and culture as legitimate value in determining need and behaviour. We need to reactivate the universities who stopped looking for money in this area. And I had this fantastic meeting on Thursday with the Centre for Cross-Cultural Research. And I was enthused, and I started to think, you know, we have pockets of this right around Australia, but, you know, you've got the rudiments here and people actually driving the research agenda. And I think we need to develop far stronger evidence-based advocacy and find new ways to deliver this. This needs to be our domain. We need to utilise demographic, consumption and performance data to establish relevance and importance. I've already talked about the aged care issue because it's not one of equity anymore, it's one of necessity. If I'm suggesting that the population profile of a certain community is so old that unless we start doing things well now, it will be too late because they'll die. They will die. That's not necessarily an issue because we all die. My issue is the fact that some people are ageing without dignity and without the services they need for both them and their families. And I turn it around as well. We should be talking about families and children. Why do I do that? Because demographically, 1.7 children per family is the Australian norm. But in some of our communities, especially more recent arrivals, that number is 4, 5, 3.2. So when we're structuring family-based programs, when we're structuring children's programs, are we prioritising those groups because of their demographic relevance? And that is where we've got to take it. And we need to build research into the ongoing agenda, and we need to find new ways to document and experience ethnic communities, and this has been a really interesting one. We've been doing a lot of stuff around big numbers and demography and big studies, but the most effective tool we've now developed out of the Federation of Ethnic Communities Councils is that, and this is quite funny, it's almost ironic, part of our funding from the Department of Immigration that we received to sustain this allows us to do consultations around access and equity. I don't know if they know what they have allowed us to do, because they've given us now the resources that we can actually go to grassroots levels and get stories from people, get experiences from people. And as soon as we get one of those stories, two of those stories, we don't need to mass hundreds of stories to actually run an argument. We need one. We already know the arguments, but we need the evidence. We need this life experience as a way of actually being able to elaborate and deliver in a real sense to the people who are making the decisions.